Well, good morning and welcome to the Life class broadcasted from here in Nashville. And it is Mother's Day, May the 11th, 2025. And we are going to discuss a topic today that we were just joking around might not sound like an ideal one for Mother's Day, but I think that, we are talking about something that has been requested a lot and something that's probably the least researched and studied topic in the United States in comparison to lots of other things, and something that I've kind of devoted most of my professional life to studying. Maybe it is because I experienced this in my personal family early on and saw this also happen within my family system and experienced various forms of this throughout my life. In 1999, I joined the International Trauma and Addiction Professionals group and had extensive training on what was called the Bowen theory, which was named after psychiatrist Dr. Murray Bowen. And it was really a groundbreaking type of theory, because for the very first time, those of us who had been affected miserably by addiction and very destructive systems in the family finally were able to get together as a family and have a plan where we could begin to protect ourselves emotionally. And then later on, maybe finding out if we had been in families affected deeply by narcissism or sexual abuse, those kind of things. And in my case, all three. We began to come up with crafting of plans to alleviate suffering and then help families to do that. Now, this was a very healing tool that we found very, very helpful for our client families, because it enabled us to customize these things from what maybe on one end of the spectrum was just a complete cut off to something that had very reasonable boundaries that did not allow a person to destroy themselves and destroy us, and might permit, gathering on holidays, but really taught a person how to eliminate certain subjects from coming up. You get the drift. And so basically there were three things with the Bowen theory. It focused on emotional fusion, which is also called enmeshment. For example, when a parent experienced the child's emotions so much as their own that they could not tell the difference between one stopped and the other started, and normal development just did not take place. And then also something called in the boundary blurring, and also focusing on emotional differentiation, which basically would teach a person to become healthy in managing their own emotions, making independent decisions, and becoming authentic. And sometimes you just did not find those where codependency just flourished in unhealthy homes. The other thing it touched on was something called triangles or triangulation. This would be when there would be conflict or tension between two people, and somehow there'd be a third party that would be drawn in to try to diffuse that conflict. So if that's done in a negative way, for example, with a child, this can cause a great emotional distress, particularly when the parents are not getting along and one of the parents reaches out, involves one of the children, unloads on them in an emotional incest situation. So, to have names for some of the things that I had grown up with was just opened up a whole new world. So recognizing how what these things were and how we could heal and how we could help other families heal was just like a whole new world. The third thing was called multi-generational transmission, and seeing how these things were passed from family to family through the generations. As it says and has said in the Bible, the sins of the father passed down, and that gave it a whole new meaning in seeing how these processes really were indeed passed down through to shape the family dynamics, behavior patterns, how people reacted emotionally, relationship dynamics. So I began to see in my work with lots and lots of different types of recovery circles how when people got well, they had this iron will to try to break these harmful cycles in their generations. And sure enough, out of the Bowen theory emerged a lot of exercises which, if practiced and committed to, really did begin to result in some health. So I was really sold on this. And this was a great advantage to me that I think if I hadn't known the suffering and seen the suffering I had, I wouldn't have been interested. It wouldn't have caught my attention. I wouldn't have invested myself. So it's kind of a story of really a lot of light coming out of a lot of darkness. And that's just my little personal take on that. So one of the things that I have seen in kind of an overview on, say, like the last 25 years is that in this example, we have this useful, life-saving, boundary healing model, just talking about this, that has sort of become misused or twisted, along with just common sense or wisdom. And I think through entitlement, politics, COVID, social media, maybe lack of good family training, as Clay was saying in his earlier sermon, definitely social media, digital, that kind of useful healing model, which has brought health to families and kept harm from further disintegration, has been sort of disintegrated into a divisive weapon that we're seeing all over the place now that's splitting families. Where, for example, we are seeing adult children writing off their parents, over a lifted eyebrow at Thanksgiving dinner, over a difference in politics, a comment over child rearing, best friends getting into an absolute war over something that's misinterpreted over text, this other extreme. So I wanted to open kind of a forum to where we could look at how something that is meant for good is greatly being understood, and also at the same time for our listeners to find a place for themselves within this big continuum by offering some views of the experts here. It is Mother's Day, and I myself in my own life wanted children so badly and tried through years of infertility to have them. And when I did, I always felt my children were so wanted and so loved and wanted nothing but the best for them. And I found myself with one of mine falling into one of the categories that again and again, only today do the experts say if you are in a dangerous, pathological, or criminal situation, yes, sometimes estrangement is needed. Back when all of this was happening, I was sort of the target of the Southern shame. We don't understand how a mother could do that. And I did not have the validation. I did not have the support. So I must say, in putting this together on Mother's Day, I received tremendous affirmation and peace. That yes, I've made the right decision in sparing my own life and those of the loved ones around me. But I can see how an incorrect understanding of estrangement has sort of been a tool for shaming in the Southern way. And I will give you an example of a very well written article about how different cultures can misunderstand the concept of estrangement. So let me give you a little sneak peek into one of my favorite researchers, Dr. Tamara Hill, who is an expert on family trauma. And when she talks about this, about healing the pain of estrangement and alienation, with that kind of a problem, it just brings out the worst, because it brings out pain and fear, sadness, sorrow, regret, guilt. And it also can cause people to kind of socially isolate, that feeling like, we're the only ones. We don't want to tell people what we're going through. We just feel like we're not going to get the kind of support that we need. Hence my mention of myself, 20 years ago. That's kind of the way it was. So she finds some interesting principles, and the first would be to learn something called radical acceptance. And this is something that I leaned into with all of my might when the book by Tara Brach first came out, and still do. You will find a tear-stained, double underlined, many pages on that particular book. And the idea of that is that there are some things that no matter how terrible they are, and no matter how much pain they cause us, we cannot change them. It's like the parent who may have written a great amends letter to the adult child and might have done just everything right. And the kid may still not be willing to reconcile or able to talk. And so the parent may be left with tremendous feelings of loss or sadness or regret and maybe anger. And this could be, I see a lot of adult siblings this way, because there's a lot of sibling estrangement. But part of what makes those feelings worse and more painful and difficult is the way that we fight our feelings, and we cannot accept our feelings as human beings. The reality is, the more we fight them, the worse off we're going to be. And those of you who have been around counseling a while probably heard of Marcia Linehan, who's a psychology, and she developed a school of thought that she used called dialectic behavior therapy, DBT. And I love this quote: "The pathway out of hell is through misery. The more we fight our misery, the more we remain in hell." So it's the cease fighting. Still, cease fighting. The more we fight, the more we suffer. So what she means by that comment is that the more we kind of feel like, oh no, I can't stand this. I cannot tolerate this. This is too painful. This is too difficult. I can't live without my child. What's my life going to be like if I never see my child again? And I remember going through this so many different times. The worst that we're going to feel more pain, we're going to feel, would just make ourselves miserable. And I did this for a long time. There was a study done at Stanford where they took two groups of people, and they had each immersed arm in arm in freezing cold water, which is a very painful feeling if you've ever done some of those polar baths. I did it with the grandchildren in Denver last year. It can be very painful. And the first group said, now, when you do that, I want you to just do whatever you can do to put that feeling out of your mind, however you need to distract yourself. In the second group, they said, now what I want you to do is go toward that feeling and really focus on what that cold water feels like now. And so paradoxically, and important to this point, is that the group that was told to go toward the feeling, to actually focus on what that feeling felt like, could actually keep their arm in the water longer. And they rated it as much less painful than the group that was kind of told to run for it. So when you hear the phrase, lean into the feeling, name the feeling. So when I got down under this creek from about shin level down in Denver, I recalled these things. Before I knew it, 5 minutes was up. The grandchildren were going, Granny Annie, are you dead? Oh, well, Marcia, this stuff really does work. So there's really nothing that can be said in these situations that's going to cause you to not feel pain if you're in this situation. You are going to feel pain. You be out, and if it's a grandchild that's alienated, every time you see a grandparent pushing a stroller around in the park, it's just going to hit you hard. If you're going to see photographs maybe of the child when you're a young, innocent little happy baby, and this child has maybe, destroyed their life or part of yours, you're going to feel that pang. And so, plus if you have had a lot of drama and trauma within your family, and then you go visit somebody and they've got all their little photographs out and the child's artwork, and, the music is playing and the pot roast is in the oven and everything is all, nirvana. This is going to do a head trip on you. It's kind of like, am I the only one? How do people do this? Is this the real world for them? It raises all kinds of discomforting, unsettled feelings. And then maybe their kids come home from college through the back door while you're there, and they're all lovey-dovey and yes ma'am and no ma'am. And it's kind of like, why did we end up on a different planet? What is wrong with my picture? What have I done? And so that's kind of tied to this notion of radical acceptance, that the more we allow our feelings to come and go, the more we label them, the more we face the feeling, the shorter the duration. So that's a practical little tip from Tamara, and also based on DBT. One of the studies that has been done that I think is pretty interesting is by a man by the name of Dr. Pillerman. Let me get my notes here just real quick. Yeah, Carl Pillermer. And he was chairman of the sociology department at Cornell University. And he was one of the people that really stood up and said, why is there sort of just one branch? The Bowen theory, has really been at this for years, but then why don't we have any research on family estrangement? So he undertook this as a major project, and basically, not to give you a bunch of statistics, but he found that in his study over a couple of thousand people, that 27%, or basically 1 in 4 of American households, had experienced some type of estrangement, which if you took that over the whole population would be 67 million Americans in the U.S. population. So I looked back again at my childhood when I first read that, and I thought, wow, okay, so I really wasn't the only one. I grew up with my father, very kind and loving pastoral counselor, who would never answer a question about his own father. I remember the day when he told me, I think I was way in elementary school, that I had cousins that I didn't know about. There had been estrangement for such a long time. I remember asking my mother why she didn't speak to certain people. I had a loving godmother who was suddenly cut off by her, and we never knew why. And so I had to go around secretly. It were lots of things like that probably were a generational thing, I've come to know. And then meeting other families that had grown up in the South, mine had not, who said, blood is blood. That is a sin. It is abhorrent to God. You will go to hell for that. So lots of massive confusion about family beliefs. Dr. Pillemer has written a book called Fault Lines, Fractured Families and How to Mend Them. And he was very interested in family rifts. And so it was his study that was pretty groundbreaking. And then he did in-depth interviews with 100 families who have repaired their family rifts successfully. So out of that, he constructed kind of a roadmap for reconciliation, which I think is pretty cool. And here's what he found. He found that there are many reasons that they reach a point of estrangement. Here's the most common: conflicts over money and inheritance, which is no surprise. Conflicts with in-laws, especially if somebody is forced to choose between his or her spouse and the family of origin. A difficult childhood that included harsh parenting or favoritism. Discrepancies in values and lifestyles. The consequences of estrangement can be devastating. Just the stress of this being chronically unresolved. And the evidence clearly demonstrated that this type of stress leads to depression and anxiety and of course, even physical problems. One study, and I'm not necessarily sure if it came up in this, but that most people could not explain or verbalize or tell what was it about. And that was surprising to me. They didn't have a grip. When they would interview people years later, they really couldn't, maybe they really didn't know what it was about. So Pillemer calls collateral damage when other family members who are not involved in the argument are pulled into the rift and cut off from loved ones. So the rift created a loss of social capital and cut people off from the emotional support and resources. He does say that there are circumstances where the estrangement is necessary and healthy. For example, cutting off a family member who is abusive, threatening, or engages in illegal activities. But he says for most people who have experienced it, calling a truce can be beneficial. And then he goes through several things. I will have to say that in my experience, in my practice, I have seen people go just to try absolutely everything they possibly can and go to the point of sacrificing their health and use this as an absolute last resort. And when they've come out on the other side, the result has been they find peace for the absolute first time. And I don't know whether I am I've been so blessed to work with some really fine people who give it all that they have got and have good hearts, but it's been just about absolutely necessary in the cases that I have worked with, which have involved extreme narcissism, alcoholism, drug addiction, personality disorders, when there's been something like this. Other people, my colleagues, have had a lot of very brutal cases in which there have been hurt over casual comments, politics, religion, this kind of thing. And I wanted to bring to you an article that I thought was so well written that was actually written by a Christian writer, and it's called When Family Hurts, Choosing Love Over Estrangement. And she also was very interested in Carl Pillamer's 1 in 4 Americans is Estranged. And here's what Cheryl Magnus says about this. She says, the estrangement is not the kind where parties have merely drifted apart. It is a formal, intentional estrangement by design, growing out of one party's decision to break all ties with the other. Philomer and other researchers say it's a phenomenon that's on the rise, and they're trying to find out why. So she quotes a recent piece that was done for the BBC, a journalist by the name of Maddie Savage, and in that piece, Savage reviews some of the common patterns in intentional family estrangement. And more often than not, now what we're seeing is the separation occurs between a parent and an adult child and is driven by the child. Some commonly cited reasons are past or present abuse, fallout from a divorce, arguments over how financial or emotional capital is dispensed, and conflicting politics, beliefs, or values. Savage relates the story of a man named Scott who broke with his parents in 2019 over their vocalizing in front of his 7-year-old child expressions he took as white supremacist views. A couple of years after the initial separation, Scott said his mother reached out to him to reconnect, but he texted her to say he would only consider reconnecting if she apologized and acknowledged that her comments had been, quote-unquote, horribly racist. So far, he has not heard back from her. My husband and I, says the author of this article, have had some experience with family estrangement. I come from a large blended family, the youngest and only ours of a his, hers, and ours family of 11 children. When I was growing up, there was intense family strife fueled by mental illness, alcoholism, and blended family dynamics. As the years went on and people left home and moved away, I felt a strong drive as the family glue to help keep the various branches of our family tree somewhat connected, but it was a largely losing battle. I think some of the estrangement my family has experienced was probably less the result of people's conscious decisions than just the natural consequences of people's complicated lives, the intervening miles, and simply growing apart. But past pain and the need for personal preservation in the present certainly played a part. Even if there is no overt or official plan to practice estrangement, dysfunction makes the phone a lot easier to ignore when it rings. While the estrangement I've seen in my family leans toward the accidental, that in my husband's family is decidedly intentional. My husband calls it shunning, and you all probably heard me use this word as kind of a cultural practice that dates, way back through the civilizations, but we do see this a lot in the South. And this author says that her husband attributes it to ingrained Southern culture. As outlined by this piece at the Art of Manliness, which is a piece of writing, it's part of a larger series on honor, the agrarian, and the less populated nature of the southern states. It fed a tradition in which the foundation of every community was one's extended family. As a result of the close-knit, more homogenized nature of Southern society, two fundamental requirements of traditional honor remained in place: a cohesive honor code that everyone in the group understood and ascribed to, and face-to-face interactions that allowed members to judge each other's reputations. This also left in place traditional honors mechanisms for dealing with social deviance, public shame, and group justice. Yet, it was the threat of simple, informal shunning, being made an outcast, that was enough to get most every Southerner to conform to the code. As in all traditional honor societies, a Southerner's relations with others and their inclusion in the community were the heart of life. One could not separate their personal identity and happiness from their membership in the group. And I think that this is something that just burns through all of us as we look at our inner child and as we look at times that we felt exiled from ourselves, as we talk about the development of shame early in our lives, if you go back to that talk. And so, thus, to be abandoned was the worst possible fate. And also, too, how we abandon ourselves later in life. She goes on to say, while there is much to be admired about Southern embracing of family ties, and even about using family influence to manage and moderate bad behavior, the use of those ties for the sake of self-serving manipulation and bullying can quickly become toxic. Unfortunately, my husband's mother was well versed in such tactics. She taught them to her children, and as a result did irreparable damage to the family as a whole. There are times when intentional family estrangement is warranted for reasons of physical and emotional family survival. But as highlighted by Savage, it has become easier than ever to cut family ties for any old reason whatsoever. And this is because in the 21st century, we simply don't need our families as much for simple survival like we used to. College students don't need family support to get through school because the government provides the funds, student loans. If we don't take care of our family members who are aged, disabled, or rearing children alone, the government might do that as well, or even pay us to do it. So just our state of economic or social mobility, just change, is a game changer since these years that I am talking about. So she really goes on to say, that, in her mind, there's never a valid reason for cutting off a family member except in those cases when it is physical and emotional survival. And that includes just, your own emotional survival. I think that's what the Bowen theory, was really, really based on. When this is my chance, I absolutely am tortured by this, by anxiety and depression. She sums it up by saying that whether by biology or otherwise, family is a gift, a complex and challenging one, but a gift nonetheless. We should think long and hard before rejecting it. And that's such good advice for what is happening today. However, Christ came that we might have life, whatever you believe or don't believe. Love is light. Love is life. You have this one life in this training school on earth. We're to use it very wisely. And if we throw away our energy and our wisdom and our physical health on someone who's is intent on destroying us, that makes no sense. So we have to take each situation and look at it in terms of the higher good. I think that there are some different ways to sort of label family estrangements. In the Bowen theory, you have sort of an emotional cutoff. And I kind of liken that to, in Al-Anon, learn to love from a distance. You can still love the person as a person, but it would only be wise to not interact with them because of repeated hurts. No, it may be that you have to ignore their phone calls. You have to ignore the text, because every time you get back into it with them, there's damage. Okay? So there are very creative ways of blocking text messages, not reading them. But however, if, you want to send them a card at Christmas, or, you might sit at the table but arrange the seating arrangements where you're not by them, take your own car. There are a multitude of creative arrangements. So it's not a black and white situation. Dr. Tamra has some very good things to say about this. She says, for example, in her practice, if you happen to be in this person's presence, say at a funeral, you might just say, you might decide, I'm not going to give eye contact. I'm not going to verbally engage. If this person's critical and judgmental, if I just happen to see them, I make up my mind that I'm going to immediately, turn my back and head for the car. I'm going to take a buffer person with me, as a support person, because you know that there's going to be injury. You know that you're going to be hurt. So the best thing that you can do is to cut off all emotional communication, and that you can engage in what's called distancing. And that's another form of emotional cutoff. So you have physical distancing. That means you're completely distancing from the person. You're not sitting next to them. You're not standing across from them. And you're not going to be anywhere around them. And sometimes people can get through the most awkward situations by pre-planning this. And it's just the wisest thing in the world. Just the wisest thing. But if you don't plan and you don't take care of yourself, right back in to the situation. There's one thing I wanted to read that I think was very timely for Richard Rohr to send out this last week. And I wanted to look at sort of the bringing home again of ourselves and how this applies. How we can not hate or split off our exiled family members, but practice that radical acceptance. In other words, everyone is a child of God. And the more we hate And the more that we resent and we keep up our internal dialogue against them, the more that we're hurting ourselves and drinking the poison and dwelling. You know, we have any faith at all that the universe is and will take care of these people that we cannot afford to allow to damage our lives anymore, and we've done what we can, and that we simply have to have certain boundaries to allow us to live a life that will be calm, that will be peaceful. And we're just absolutely fine with that. But the minute that we break our vows to ourselves, all chaos ensues. Okay, many of us are in that situation. We really have to, I think, have people around us that understand that support us. So if we ever engage in self-doubt, we can go back to them for affirmation that we are worth it, our lives are worth it, that there's nothing else to be done, that we did everything that we could. And what would the consequences be? To refresh our memory. What are the devastating consequences to us? Because in these cases, there's no change, and there will be no change on the part of the other party. One of my favorite books that I use has a very upsetting title, but it's also very to the point, The Hope That Kills by Lucy Papillon. And this is often a magical kind of thinking, particularly with adult children of alcoholics, that's persistent. If only I can say it better this time, do it better this time, give more, that this other person who is selfish and self-absorbed to the core, that they will change, they will treat me differently. This is a poem by Rosemary Traumer, and it's entitled Letter to the Parts of Me I Have Tried to Exile. Let's think back to the parts of ourselves that we have tried to cast off, parts of ourselves that we have tried to hate through the years, that I've encouraged you to welcome back and just to accept. Let me read this very slowly. The healing journey to welcome all the aspects of ourselves. I'm sorry. I thought banishing you was the way to become better, more perfect, more good, more free. The irony? I thought if I cut you off and cast you out, if I built the walls high enough, then the parts left would be more whole. As if the sweet orange doesn't need the toughened rind, the bitter seed. As if the forest doesn't need the blue fury of fire. It didn't work, did it? The exile. You were always here, jangling the hinges, banging at the door, whispering through the cracks. Left to myself, I wouldn't have known to take down the walls, nor would I have had the strength to do so. That act was grace disguised as disaster. But now that the walls are rubble, it is also grace that teaches me to want to embrace you. Grace that guides me to be gentle, even with the part of me that would still try to exile any other part. It is grace that invites me to name all parts beloved. How honest it all is. How human. I promise to keep learning how to know you as my own, to practice opening to what at first feels unwanted, to meet it with understanding, to trust that all belongs, and to welcome you home. Welcoming the parts of ourselves home. Wholeness. Sometimes it's necessary to have distance from others in our lives so that we can create enough silence to even think about these things. When our lives are in chaos, our lives are in pain, our lives are in distress, we're being told untruths about ourselves from a harmful person. Maybe just a period, doesn't mean like forever, but just time to get still enough with ourselves to think about the question, what have I exiled from myself? My joy, my art, my creativity? Do I hate my anger? Do I hate my own sadness? What is it that makes me me? I need to listen to it and welcome them home. The prodigal son, Clay talked about this morning in the sermon, interestingly, is a metaphor for this. The loving father who welcomes home with grace his misbehaving, wandering, spendthrift son with grace. We can even settle in our hearts our family members that we cannot allow closeness to us. We can reach peace. We can reach wholeness. We can settle that in our hearts and let them go to God. We can have perfect peace, but it doesn't mean that we allow people to harm us or sometimes even to see us. It's all a matter of the heart. And when we reach that peace point and we know what is good and what is good for us, we need to trust ourselves. I think the life class gives us tools that we can use in all these parts of our lives, whether it's deep within us, our exile parts, bringing us back together. And as we do that, and as we get healthy ourselves, we are in a better position to evaluate all of our relationships. And if we've already taken care of many of our external relationships, then we can feel good about that. You know, I already knew that wasn't good for me. I've already sort of eliminated this force from my life. It takes great courage to do that. So I appreciate so much your showing up and listening. And wherever you are, I wish you a happy Mother's Day, and to the women in your life that you remember, that you love. I extend peace, love, joy, and blessing. Thank you.